Let's go to Mick Mulvaney on where this whole thing stands, because you have the political stuff, you have the economic stuff, you have the Federal Reserve now poised to increase rates 3/4 of a point. Probably from Mick's vantage point, that's the most crucial development this week. Of course, you know him very well, the former acting White House chief of staff, former OMB director. He knows his numbers. He knows his stuff. Whatever you might think of politics, and we always get on the left and right people shouting and screaming at each other. He is a very smart man when it comes to these type of issues. So, Mick, good to have you, and thank you for taking the time. I want to focus, if I can, on the Fed and your thinking, because right now the betting is we're going to see rates go up by another 3/4 of a point. A lot of people from Goldman to Morgan Stanley see maybe the overnight bank lending rate topping at or about the 5% level. And when you step back and you look at that, that's 5 full percentage points higher than we were a year ago. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and 12 points below where we were in the 1970s. So it's just a different kind of world right now. I just wondered, Neil, about how high they can raise the rates. Keep in mind, we're already borrowing money right now to pay the interest carry, right? So the amount of interest we pay every single day comes out of additional debt, which means that our debt is going up so that we can pay the interest on the debt that we have. And we're printing that money to do it. So we go more into debt. We start on this vicious cycle down. If the Fed raises the rates much more than they already have, the person that thing that pays the most interest is the federal government. So I think they're restricted really in how much they can raise the rates. And I actually think that's a good thing, because I'm not sure raising rates really solves
Well, wait a minute. That's a fascinating point, that you think the Fed would be kind of, forced to reserve a little bit because of all that debt. And you're quite right. I mean, I think it's adding $180 to $200 billion a year just in the higher rate costs we're looking at now. So that even if inflation were a problem still, the Fed would slow down, maybe even stop?
Yeah, I think the average debt right now, our maturities, our average maturities in our debt is about 5 years. So it's someplace between the 2-year and the 10, and those costs are right someplace between 3.5% and 4%, depending on where you are in the week and so forth. That's a huge amount of money. If that goes to 10%, if the government's borrowing costs go to 10% on $30 trillion, that math is pretty easy. That's $3 trillion a year just in interest payments. It's an obscene amount of money. So I do think the Fed is restricted, or at least in the back of their minds, they know they can't do the same thing they did in the 1970s because we're just too heavily in debt.
This is where we wade into more the political stuff that you generally try to eschew these days, and I can understand. But if you think about it, there's been a populist wave against governments, whether liberal or conservative. Liz Truss turned on by her own party in Britain, and the financial institutions turned on her as well. Even in Brazil right now, favoring a leftist over the more moderate president for the time being. But I see this playing out again and again. You think it should be a reminder to Republicans that, waves like this aren't confined to parties, just for the time being, parties in power?
Yeah, and waves can be strange, right? They can be a wave for you or a wave against somebody else, and you always have to be real careful as to what that is, because it gives you, if you're on the winning side of that wave, you have different political capital depending upon how you got into office. I do think, to get into the politics a little bit, I think one of the things you're seeing, to move away from the economics for just a second, I'll come back if you want to, but is that the Republicans really are the only candidates talking to these undecided voters about things they care about. Undecided voters are undecided for a reason. They don't follow a party. They don't follow politics very quickly or very closely. What do they care about now? Inflation and maybe crime. And the Republicans are talking about that. The Democrats are talking about abortion. It's a really tough sort of campaign strategy to go out to the voter and say, I know you want to talk about X, but you're wrong about that. Let's go talk about Y. That tends to turn voters off and drive them to the other party, which is where I think the Democrats are making a big mistake right now, aside from all that's going wrong with the economy itself.
If I can go back, Director, to what you were saying at the outset about what could be a potential Fed pivot, but maybe not for the reasons that a lot of folks think. If you're right and they're concerned about overburdening the U.S. debt with added, interest rate costs, that I get. But it might lead some to think they won't be done with their inflation fight and will be in another battle. What do you think?
Look, I think the Fed is limited, right? We're in a problem caused a little bit by their interest rate policies over the course of the last decades, but also because of the supply restrictions that we've had. Yes, we have COVID. That's been a problem. Yes, we have Russia. That's been a significant problem. But you've also had the re-regulatory policies of this administration. So as you sit here and look at inflation as too much money chasing too few goods, the Fed really can sort of help on the supply of money, but they're actually hurting on the supply of goods. They're making it harder to get stuff to market. The Biden administration continues to make it harder to get stuff to market. So until we look at inflation from both sides, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Do you apply the same standards to tax cuts that people often do to spending? In other words, if you don't pay for them, you're in trouble. Liz Truss found that out, and I'm just wondering if Republicans will too, if those cuts aren't paid for.
Well, we always look at them a little bit differently. The best kind of deficits were the kind that let you keep more of your money because that's a more efficient allocation of capital. The worst kind of deficits were ones that you would run for welfare, income redistribution, because that's the least type of efficient debt that you can probably have. I don't know if people care yet about debt. Keep in mind, half of the people in this country seem to think inflation is caused by corporate greed and oligopolistic behavior. Until we start changing people's minds about what causes inflation, it's going to be really hard to fix. But look, I think it's here for a while. You know, I've talked before about how slow the government spends money. They've appropriated all this money over the course of the last year, but not all that money, nowhere near all of that money has left the government coffers yet. It's not out in the economy. When I took over OMB, Neil, we still had money that we hadn't spent from Hurricane Superstorm Sandy or Katrina back in the 2000s. So there's a lot of money still to flow out there. We need more goods at market. I don't think you're going to get it with this administration.
I always learn a lot. Mick Mulvaney, thank you very much. A former acting White House chief of staff, former Office of Management and Budget Director. He knows his numbers. Man, does he know his numbers.